It is okay to feel angry. It is okay and understandable, and actually it can be a good thing that we respond to what's going on in the world. But it's not okay to be stuck in our own anger. It is not okay to only stay in that little cocoon and repeat the same kind of energy again and again, because it becomes destructive. So let's take our anger, let's hold it in our hands, let's recognize its existence, embrace it, respect it, but then turn it into something much more positive, much more constructive. And I think in that regard, anger cannot be healed with further anger. Anger can only be healed with compassion. So I want to talk about the word anger. Where does the word come from? And where does our anger come from? And it's very interesting because when we look at the etymology of the word, we realize that these two questions are related, they're connected. Because when you follow the pedigree of the word, it takes us back to Old Norse, angr, which means sorrow or hurt or grief. So it's very interesting to see that at the core, at the heart of anger is actually pain. There is hurt there. The word is also connected to its Indo-European roots, meaning to feel constricted, sometimes even strangled, suffocated. There's a tightness almost in your chest. And that is another trajectory that I find interesting, another etymological trajectory. But I think what I want to tell you, what I find interesting, is also how the word anger is related to the word angst or anguish, almost like an existential angst. These are all connected. They are relatives. And it is an important word in that regard because I think we're living in the age of pessimism. Once upon a time, not that long ago, there was so much optimism across the world in late 1990s, early 2000s, was a time of extreme optimism, if not even complacency. And then I think the pendulum swung to the other end, and today we're living in the age of anxiety, anger, existential angst, pessimism. So we need to talk about these words. What does it mean? Is it a completely negative emotion, or does it have some positive traits in itself? And in order to understand that, I always go back to Audre Lorde. A woman, a writer, a poet, a civil rights activist, a librarian whom I respect a lot. And Audre Lorde was someone who thought about anger a lot, and she had a lot of anger inside her soul. And she mentioned how she would carry that anger silently for a long time until she realized she has to express it. In her case, anger is a direct response to racism, to racial injustice, to being on the receiving end of structural racism day after day. So it is the way she responds to inequalities and injustices. I also know in that regard that anger can be very understandable. I think you might even say in today's world, if we don't feel angry from time to time, or if we don't find ourselves dealing with anxiety, with angst from time to time, maybe we're not really following what's going on in the world, across the world, here and there and everywhere. When we do follow, when we understand how the climate crisis is unfolding, how inequalities are deepening and widening, how at a time when we need to connect most, where we ended up is a type of vaccine nationalism or tribalism. When you start paying attention to such things, of course you feel anxiety, of course you feel frustration, and yes, some kind of anger as well. But the problem with anger is in the long run, it becomes repetitive and it can become quite toxic. So in order to understand that side of anger, I look at another writer whom I respect a lot, and that is Toni Morrison. She talks about how she feels angry when she observes and analyzes all that's happening in the world, but then she takes her anger and she sits down at her desk and she goes on and she works and she writes. So I think rather than whether you feel angry or not, the main question is, what do you do with your anger? Can we transform it into something more positive and more constructive, both for ourselves individually, but also for our communities and for our societies? So can we see anger as a source of energy and channel it into something hopefully better for everyone? Personally, I think I also want to tell you that I am no stranger to anger either. For a very long time, I was an angry person, and I understand. I relate to people who feel very angry. In my personal case, it was a response to the world around me, to the inequalities around me, the things that I found, unfair. Frustrating, hurtful. But also I think there was an individual reason, because I come from a broken family and I grew up without seeing my father. And I always knew he was a very good father to his other children. But with me, it was a completely different story. So I think growing up, I felt like I was the forgotten child, And it's interesting to me that it took years and years to come to terms with my own anger and to understand that inside my own anger there was hurt and there was pain as well. So I do respect anger. I do not belittle it. And sometimes people tell me, you are very calm usually. I'm not always calm, but hopefully usually I am calm today. But that's precisely because I have gone through all those tunnels of anger, valleys of anger, and there's a part of me that understands that. Maybe it's also partly why I listen to heavy metal music so much. I love the energy, the high, sometimes aggressive, angry energy in heavy metal, metalcore, industrial metal. It really speaks to my soul. But again, I'm going to come back to the same conclusion. It is okay to feel angry. It is okay and understandable. And actually, it can be a good thing that we respond to what's going on in the world. But it's not okay to be stuck in our own anger. It is not okay to only stay in that little cocoon and repeat the same kind of energy again and again, because it becomes destructive. So let's take our anger, let's hold it in our hands, let's recognize its existence, embrace it, respect it, but then turn it into something much more positive, much more constructive. And I think in that regard, anger cannot be healed with further anger. Anger can only be healed with compassion.
Say